Rockport, Massachusetts, basically, is an artist colony, in the summers particularly. Amateur artists flock there, and I grew up watching them paint and draw, and I became terribly interested in it and did all the kinds of things they were doing, painting sailboats and seagulls and fish shacks and whatever. It was the only thing that really interested me, but my art has grown from painting sailboats to what it is now.
Artist Arthur Orr came to Nashville about 20 years ago. His work has been recognized nationally in many shows over the years, and he was the first artist to be chosen by IDS, Interior Design Services, to have one of his paintings reproduced on its billboard located at a busy Nashville intersection. This month, he has a one-man show at the Tennessee Arts Commission Gallery. When I talked with him for Tennessee Kaleidoscope, we discussed personal statements which artists are often asked to write in connection with shows.
Frankly, the work is their statement. Anything beyond that is, in a sense, pretentious. But since I'd been asked so many times about where my art comes from or what my art means, I decided that I would just sit down and think, reminisce with myself. And out of all that comes this particular statement.
Here is Arthur Orr's statement, which bears the title, Where My Art Comes From.
My art comes from museum walls and supermarket shelves. My art comes from the grandeur of Wurlitzer's and the altarpiece at Ghent. It talks to me about skyscrapers with big muscles and about old slate gravestones with smiling angels of death. My art comes from the pyramids and obelisks and neon and billboards and Stonehenge. It comes from Eastern icons, cave paintings, and the stained glass windows of my youth. My art comes from kaleidoscopes, comic books, Disney's films, hex signs, and Coke machines. My art comes from a one-eyed art teacher and a new box of Crayolas. It comes from the mystery of Blake, from Vincent's visions, Rockwell's nostalgia, and from Pollock's passion, and from all the art that went before me. It comes from Roy Rogers and Trigger. My art comes from shingled fish shacks and from freshly painted lobster buoys drying in the sun. But mostly my art comes from smooth, wet stones at the ocean's edge and from something genetic which I don't understand. This is truth. This is my childhood. This is my manhood. The last little sentence here says, but mostly my art comes from smooth, wet stones at the ocean's edge. I grew up at the ocean's edge, and I was fascinated as a child by the smooth, wet stones at the ocean's edge and from the color and quality of the rock, the designs inherent in the granite.
To this artist, slabs of stone and the designs in them are so meaningful, ranging from his admiration of an obelisk in Nashville's Centennial Park to his fascination with the ancient pyramids.
The imagery has been significant in my life, the monolithic imagery of a pyramid or an obelisk. I think one of the most beautiful things in Nashville, Tennessee is the obelisk on the grounds of Centennial Park. That huge granite piece with the drill marks still in it, standing there like a sentinel, is one of the most moving pieces of art in this town. I'm amazed by it, and possibly it's because I come from a granite town where granite was mined, and I've been fascinated all my years with the rough-hewn granite slabs taken out of the quarries.
Arthur Orr's one-man show continues through April 30th at the Tennessee Arts Commission Gallery in downtown Nashville. This program made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. For Tennessee Kaleidoscope, this is Lynn Folk.
It's been a hobby of mine, but I had very little time to fool with it because I spent 31 and a half years in the Marine Corps. and I retired in July and decided to take a lesson or two at Tennessee Tech. And here I am. This is my first art show. This is a beautiful little show area, and it looks like it's a lovely town.
The town of Tullahoma, for years now, has had an annual Arts and Crafts Festival. Last year, for Tennessee Kaleidoscope, I was there and talked with several of the artists, some of them veterans of many art shows, and others first-timers like Angelo Fernandez, formerly of New York, now living in Cookville. For him, this was a beginning, and he plans to continue.
I can't let one be the final and end-all, but I did win an award in the show, so I'm very pleased with that.
Held in the spring every year, like those in so many other Tennessee towns, the Tullahoma Show is out of doors, and artists come from all around, even from out of state, for this juried competition festival, which includes several categories and offers awards, with one special award from an arts materials business. And registration is limited for exhibitors. Here's Lucy Hollis, Executive Director of the Tullahoma Fine Arts Center.
We have limited the number of exhibitors, so we have the same number now each year. One of the special things is that the Grumbacher Art Material Company presents an award here at our festival. We feel like that it's a real strong asset and drawing card for the best of the arts. We have people coming from 5 states for this annual event. We have categories that include painting, graphics and drawings, sculpture, crafts, and photography. We have between $3,000 and $4,500 each year spent in purchase awards. This is a real drawing card too, because we can assure those people that come to our festival that there are going to be sales made here.
Some of the artists are townspeople, like Bill Work. His full-time job is with a local company, but he spends most of his after-hours time with his painting.
I do it on the side and work at Cleveland Pneumatic. We make the major components for landing gear for airplane.
One of Bill Work's paintings incorporates something meaningful to him and to many Tennesseans, the birdhouse advertisements for a well-known tourist attraction. This is a part of an impressionistic painting he did, a view from the highway.
It was a scene that I saw up near Knoxville, coming down the interstate, coming back from the Tennessee Arts Commission conference. What I saw was an impression of a scene up on the hillside. Then when I got home, I did a sketch of it and then did the painting. The thing that caught my eye along the interstate was the Sea Rock City birdhouse, and it was slanted over, and it was just the red and the slant of it was what caught my eye. And then of course I saw the buildings behind it and tried to catch it. In my experience living here in Tennessee for the last 8 years, that scene pretty much depicted what I kind of view as Tennessee. So I tried to capture it on paper, and it appears that it has been successful.
Another artist who paints Tennessee scenery, Pat Jones of Lewisburg. She works mainly in pastels now because she finds a special delight in using them. And most of her work is done in her studio out in the country, a good place to paint her favorite subjects.
I prefer the landscapes, and I work in pastels now, exclusively. I did some watercolor and some acrylics, but now I've decided pastels really where I want to work. It's a direct hands-on contact media in that you get your fingers in it, and you can get your fingers dirty, I guess, but you really feel like you're in contact with it. 3 of the 100 artists at last year's Arts and Crafts Festival, which will be again this year in May in Tullahoma on the lawn of the South Jackson Civic Center building. Originally, this building was a school, the oldest school in Tullahoma. Once marked for demolition, the old structure has now been restored and turned into a community playhouse and civic center. Surrounded by lots of trees, it's an attractive place and a significant part of heritage and history, as is the Tullahoma Fine Arts Center across the street, a beautiful restored Victorian house, the scene of lots of art shows and activities. This program, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. For Tennessee Kaleidoscope, this is Lynn Folk.
probably one of the more interesting projects that we've done in terms of Intervisions, and through our projects we get to develop our concept more, was a project entitled Elvi, which was a video documentary on Elvis impersonators. And that was presented by Elisa Blatis, an artist that came forward with the idea. And the project has just recently been completed, and it premiered at the Peabody, and with rave reviews. Very unique concept.
Eva Watson, director of Intervisions, the community arts program of the Memphis Arts Council. When I talked to Eva Watson in her office, we discussed various projects of Intervisions, but we focused mainly on Elvi. It's a half-hour documentary about Elvis Presley impersonators and the people who pay to see them. It's the result of a grant from the Memphis Arts Council to Elisa Blatis.
She had applied for a grant for the idea of wanting to do this documentary, and we thought it was a rather unique idea because anything surrounded with around Elvis is certainly an appealing kind of idea. And so we thought that it was a kind of unique approach, and we decided to fund her the money. Essentially, she got the impersonators to come here to Memphis, and she did all the videotaping. We were able to work with our people in terms of organizations and corporate groups who were really willing to help. A lot of volunteers got involved in it, and produced a real good product, depicting their reasons for wanting to be Elvis impersonators, showing a little bit of performance. That basically is how it works.
What were some of the reasons they gave for wanting to be Elvis impersonators?
For some, it was a religious calling, which I thought was interesting. For others, it was just a job. For others, it was a need to try to depict Elvis as he really was, and so the impersonator was trying to give a more genuine reflection of the man, as opposed to the misconceptions that people sometimes portray.
How many impersonators did she have in this show?
I could say about 10. And again, you're getting spot interviews, you're getting footage of some performance. It's more of just interviews, and then you have interviews with like George Klein's perception of Elvis impersonators, and interviewing people around Graceland, what their perceptions are of Elvis impersonators. That all made it the documentary that it is. There was also interesting one female Elvis impersonator. Like I said, you get a pretty good overview of people's perceptions, from the impersonator to the person who is observing the impersonator.
Did they look like Elvis?
Some of them did. I recall going to a talent thing with Elvis impersonators down on Bill Street, and I can remember walking, and for a minute you'd have to look twice because some of them really, had that reflection of Elvis. So, some of them do. Some of them look nothing like Elvis. In fact, there's one young man there with blonde hair, and he sounded more like Elvis than any of them, from my perspective.
Well, where did they come from?
From various places, Alabama. You had them from all over the country, really. But it's interesting. It offers a lot of potential, and again, it's a reflection of Intervisions in terms of what it's really trying to be, because that's another thing in terms of trying to be a program in which artists can find an avenue to come through and be able to have the opportunity to produce work such as that, or a production that they might not otherwise have the opportunity. The community gets a chance to benefit from it. The artist certainly gets a chance to benefit from it, and hopefully it moves even outside of the city. So that's why it was such a good project in that sense.
In addition to Elvi, the Intervisions program funds many projects involving minority groups in Memphis. One of them called Shut Up and Dance, another called Taking It to the Streets, and another, Amen Corner, and still another called Quick Draw Artist, featuring artists from the community drawing in shopping malls and other public places. The Intervisions concept, which started in St. Paul, Minnesota, has caught on in many places, including Memphis, because it's looking for creative, new, imaginative ideas coming out of the community. Today's program with Eva Watson of the Memphis Arts Council, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the Barkus Nugent Group, computer consultants in Nashville. For Tennessee Kaleidoscope, this is Lynn Folk.
I was a kid. Of course, I played harmonica from the time I was 5 years old. My dad played fiddle a little. My grandmother, she wrote music, and she was good. And I think she originally came from Nashville.
Many of the country music stars of the early days had fathers or grandfathers who played the fiddle, and mothers or grandmothers who played the piano or the organ. And that's the way it was with Curley Fox, whose family originally settled in Grayswood, Tennessee, near Dayton, on an English land grant. Curley started out plunking on a guitar, then playing the harmonica, and eventually played the violin. He went on to win fiddling contests, which were very popular in the early 30s. After that, he appeared all around the country on stage and radio, and for years he was on the Grand Ole Opry. He was married to singing star Texas Ruby. His first performances were as early as 1929, when he and his sister Helen Fox Kofer, who was also later on the Opry, sang and played at the Morgan Springs Hotel in the mountains near Graysville, entertaining the summer visitors who came there to dance in the evenings. I talked with Curley Fox at a reunion celebration in the Morgan Springs community when he was once again performing, this time on an outdoor stage, singing and playing some of his favorites. He says he was lucky enough during his career to meet and know some great musicians, both country and classical, and he especially admired one famous violinist.
My favorite of all violinists was Fritz Kreisler, who was a genius. And I don't read a note. I can't read music. And a lot of people think I can, because one reason I listened to him and the tone he would get and how he lingered on a note that was a beautiful note just as long as the meter would let him, and pull a feeling out of it, you know. He was my favorite of all. Then we had a lot of good old-time fiddlers, too, in this part of the country. There wasn't too many. Now there's kids 7 or 8 years old that play like people had been playing all their lives. But one reason for that is they practice, and the people that played back in my day, early day, they just played, you know, maybe one Saturday night, maybe go a month and never play no more. That's the way I play now. But for a while, I was playing 8 nights a week and sometimes 9.
These were the days when Curley Fox was performing on stage, sharing theater marquees with such notables as Fibber McGee and Molly, Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. And he was heard on radio coast to coast from KPRC in Texas and from WLW in Cincinnati. Playing on his $8 fiddle, Curley was a pioneer performer in auditoriums where country music was not usually heard.
I used to try to play where hillbillies hadn't trod. I was the first one to play at Carnegie Hall. I was one of the first to play Constitution Hall in Washington. Was one of the first to play at Kiel Auditorium in St. Louis. At that time, it was the largest. It ceased 12,000, or did then. When Rubinoff, he was one of the top radio acts. I played with him there. He wanted to see how the people who like country music would accept classical music and country music. And so we played. And had to turn them away. 2 shows, 25,000, might say, people that day. I'm not saying that as a boast. I'm just proud it was me. And this one columnist wrote about it, and he said Curley Fox with his $8 fiddle playing with Rubinoff and his Stradivarius.
Curley Fox was invited to play for the King and Queen of Greece when they visited Texas. In Texas, he played many times for Lyndon Johnson. And since 1938, there's a special day, Curley Fox Day, celebrated annually in Gadsden, Alabama.
My first appearance there was 1938, and we packed the auditorium, two shows, and that was that. So then they made a proclamation. So on the 28th of June, it's Curley Fox Day at Gadsden.
And Curley Fox returns to Gadsden every year. This program made possible by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. For Tennessee Kaleidoscope, this is Lynn Folk.
The prisoners vacated in January of 73, and we opened in July of 73. And what happened, they were going to tear this jail building away after the prisoners left, but the Historical Society leased it for to start a museum.
A jail transformed into a museum and art gallery in Winchester, Franklin County, Tennessee. This is Lynn Folk, and here is museum hostess May Gaddes, who introduced me to this unusual building as we walked through its various rooms, filled with historical objects, photographs, and paintings now. But years ago, these rooms served different purposes.
You go out of the gallery into the cell block. It's upstairs, and downstairs is the first room you come into. Used to be the sheriff's office, which is our early frontier and Indian room. And then come across the foyer to the Civil War room. Tells a little bit about the war between the states here in Franklin County. And then this office of mine used to be the kitchen, where they put the food through that big iron door into the trustee's room. And he took the food around to the prisoners in the cells. And then we have 2 rooms of cells on that side. Now back to the early frontier and Indian room, we have the Indian artifacts, and a memorial case has been made to Mr. Charlie Stubblefield. He had an invaluable knowledge of Indian artifacts, and some of his things are in the Smithsonian Museum. We have a display of old coverlets. We had 22 documented, and some of them are in the book that went over the state of Tennessee, and they're very beautiful. We have a white bedspread. It's the candlewick spread that's 179 years old. And all of the implements that the farmers used, and I had a handmade cider press that's on the wall there. It took 2 years for anyone to guess what it was. I had a lot of answers for that.
Displays from World Wars I and II and Vietnam are seen here in this old jail museum. And in the War Between the States room, a collection of guns which had been found in hollow trees.
I didn't know till recently why they hid the guns, but someone told me that if the enemy was around and they came out without their guns, they wouldn't be shot. But if they had their guns, they would be shot and killed. But they have been found in caves and under wooden cupboards also.
Some Tennesseans may be familiar with the Mary Sharp College, which no longer exists. But here in the museum are pictures as reminders of the school.
Famous old Mary Sharp College, the pictures of it, and the little doll that is dressed like the ladies used to dress, the girls that went to school there. And the diploma from that school hangs above the case. We have the cemetery book, which is 15 years in the making. It's all the old cemeteries in Franklin County. We have water cures and other remedies, because Franklin County used to be a famous water cure place.
Mementos from celebrities born in Winchester, musical instruments from years past, and pictures of band members who played these instruments. A portrait of Davy Crockett's wife who died in Winchester. Antique glassware, pen and ink drawings of historical spots. All of these would have surprised the prisoners who once were housed in this building, and hostess May Gaddes finds that visitors who come now are usually delighted by what they find.
We have a lot of overseas visitors. I recall the time that I had 35 young men, and they were from different foreign countries. And at that time, I had the calendar of all the presidents on the wall. And they all gathered around that and were talking in their native tongues. I couldn't understand what they were saying. And then I have a collection of postcards. They're so nice to send me back postcards from those foreign countries. And I have about 80.
May Gaddes, hostess at the Old Jail Museum in Winchester. This program made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the HCA Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Hospital Corporation of America. For Tennessee Kaleidoscope, this is Lynn Folk.
The most fun to do is the Shakespeare, and the most lucrative to do is the Broadway shows, and the soap operas are not a lot of fun to do. It's a kind of like just a acting factory job. You don't have much fulfillment. I don't denigrate the skills that it takes to do it well. But for me, the real fun as an actor is doing Shakespeare and doing the new plays that you do get to do in New York.
New York actor Eric Booth, who's a descendant of John Wilkes Booth. Eric Booth has been an acting instructor at the Nashville Institute for the Arts during several summer sessions. While he was in Nashville, I talked with him for Tennessee Kaleidoscope. The ability to act has been passed down for generations in his family, and Eric has appeared in several of his one-man shows in Tennessee.
First one-man show I ever did, and I did it in Chattanooga. It was called St. Mark's Gospel, which was the Gospel of Mark, word for word, and done as a play. And subsequent to that, I kind of got addicted to one-man shows. I find it thrilling. There's something challenging about having the whole responsibility. And the one I've been touring in the last couple of years is a one-man play about Hamlet, which basically includes the journey Hamlet goes through in the course of his experience, and a little bit about the journey an actor goes through in the course of playing Hamlet.
Eric Booth has ambivalent feelings toward his great-great-great-grandfather John Wilkes Booth, the man who shot Abraham Lincoln. But he has great regard for his ability as an actor and great admiration for another actor ancestor, Edwin Booth. He even has a fantasy concerning Uncle Edwin Booth.
Some madman in New York went to see Edwin Booth, John Wilkes' brother, do what's called the famous 100 Nights of Hamlet in New York, went to see it every night, and jotted down exactly how Edwin Booth did every gesture, every line reading, what the costumes looked like. And it's in a book that you can buy, that I have, and you can absolutely recreate exactly how Edwin Booth did Hamlet in 1870 when he did his famous performance. My fantasy is to recreate historically exactly the way it was done, since he is considered our greatest actor, to look at how our greatest actor did his greatest role, what the acting style was then, and to be able to play Hamlet in that production. That's my fantasy.
Far from fantasy, Eric Booth, as a child, struggled with his thoughts about John Wilkes Booth.
As a kid, I kept it really secret because it wasn't a joke. It was quite a burden that I carried as a kid, keeping it secret, because Lincoln was a big hero. And consequently, I had kept it almost completely out of touch until, as I started doing early Shakespearean roles, and then later, when I started doing some bigger Shakespearean roles, the press, I blurted it out once. And the reporter went so bonkers for this story, it became a kind of recurring theme for the publicity. And the publicity has subsequently generated a lot of people send me Booth stuff now. And so I've inadvertently become kind of a Booth maven, figuring out all the weird things and getting upset about what they did to Mrs. Surratt, and beginning, worrying about Dr. Mudd and being overjoyed that he got exonerated after all these years. So I've been, by circumstance, kind of twisted into getting involved 100 years later in this whole family scenario. And the thing that intrigues me about John Wilkes is there's a theory that of all of the family, and they were all in the theater at that generation, he was the most talented but lacked vocal training, so that at a very early age, in his early to mid-20s, he blew out his voice and was beginning to lose his voice, so that the sense of, my gosh, I'm not going to be able to make my living as an actor was rising, and was what really aggravated his political philosophy to take this tremendously violent act. But he was apparently the most talented of the family.
New York actor Eric Booth, who's been seen in television soap operas, New York stage plays, and one-man Shakespearean performances, who comes to Nashville for summer sessions with teachers when he's an instructor at the Nashville Institute for the Arts. This program, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the HCA Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Hospital Corporation of America. For Tennessee Kaleidoscope, this is Lynn Folk.
All great museums have in the basis of their collection portraiture. Humans love seeing other humans, and through the ages we have needed those visions to show us a better way to be, a way outside ourselves. That's how we know who we are, is our reflection back from other people. So the portrait artist, before there was a camera, fulfilled an extremely basic function. That is not necessary now when we have wonderful technology that will do that. So the artist's challenge is to go beyond that, to show beyond the surfaces.
This is the challenge to Chattanooga artist Eve Oldham, who mainly paints portraits, but who also does some landscape paintings. And these occasionally include her depiction of the kudzu vine, which grows so prolifically on Tennessee hillsides. She's had many exhibitions of her work in Tennessee, her most recent one in March of 1987 entitled Children of the Heart, that was in the gallery of the Tennessee Arts Commission in Nashville. She says these 20 paintings of children done in the past 15 years are her impressions of those enchanted moments when we once again become children of the heart. Some of these are real children, others imaginary children of her heart, made real by the use of pigment and light on canvas. This is Lynn Folk with another segment of a conversation with Eve Oldham when I visited her on Lookout Mountain. In a previous program, we discussed her interpretive portraits of women, and here's more. This about her writings, which have sometimes become incorporated in the paintings of the women.
As a byproduct of the illustration and the paintings, I write things about what I'm doing. Sometimes as notes to myself. Sometimes they become like a dream sequence where you have wonderful images happen in your head and things that music, if I knew how to write music, but also words. And they are not necessarily poetry, but they are more like a free verse. Frequently those things become incorporated in a painting or in a drawing. With the specific women that I'm painting, they always suggest things to me, and those things begin to appear in the canvases themselves. And they are stream of conscious things about the woman, about her attitudes, about her perception of herself, and about my perception of her.
One of the artist's subjects in her interpretive series of 10 distinctive women has found that these writings seem to appear, then disappear at various times.
And she tells me that at different times of the day, some of those things will appear, and then they sort of disappear in different light. And so it's sort of like an adventure when you view the painting at different times, that things in it emerge and then evaporate. And that's something in my work that I'm real interested in producing. It's very elusive, very hard to do, and takes a lot of accident. You have to take advantage of accidents that occur with the light and the pigment. So it's interesting that the words have become intrinsic to the paintings, to the visions.
Eve Oldham does her writing and her painting in her Lookout Mountain studio, where her gallery, Notchwood Gallery, is located. She's always lived in Chattanooga, and for the past 18 years, the mountain has been her home. This is where she enjoys and appreciates the scenery and the lush growth, even appreciates the kudzu vine, which she has painted.
I have a wonderful view of the sunrises and the river below me, and the city is beautiful as any place on earth.
Have you painted any of those scenes from your home here?
I've spent a year doing kudzu paintings. We have wonderful kudzu all over the side of the mountain, and at a certain time in the spring, it sort of heaps over everything and becomes these very strange shapes. And in the fog in the morning, it's like a fantasy. If you look at it just right, you can envision all kinds of unicorns and things that don't exist except in our imaginations. And I did a whole series of those. But the kudzu is just kind of fun for me, because when the light hits it at a certain time, it's very radiant. It has lovely qualities, but you have to have an artist's eye to see them. The French countryside, they showed lots of things, haystacks and that sort of thing, which certainly Van Gogh and Monet found those appealing and shimmering with light and color. And so it's not all that unusual that an artist would find kudzu appealing.
Artist Eve Oldham can make kudzu appealing when she paints it, using paint which she develops from self-ground earth, stone, and metallic pigments. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the HCA Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Hospital Corporation of America. This is Lynn Folk.